Well, so welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to this PLEIADE Satellite Event. This is only one event of a series that started in December 2021 and will end on the 1st of March. A series of events touching upon topics that all have to do with the PLEIADE project. I am Donatella Persico, the coordinator of the PLEIADE project, and I will introduce very briefly the project before I leave the floor to our speaker today, who is Cristina Ejosterio. Can you say it again?
Ejosterio. I know it's very difficult surname to pronounce.
I'm terrible with pronunciations of foreign names. I'm very sorry. I will leave you pronounce it every time it comes to your surname. Cristina works at the University of Nicosia in Cyprus, and she is an expert in inclusion and has many contacts with schools in her country and abroad, and will therefore make a presentation which is very much oriented to the interests of the PLEIADE teachers and also to the other teachers who have been invited to participate in this event. These PLEIADE satellite events, as I said, are short training events addressing mostly teachers, especially in the 4 languages of the PLEIADE partnership. So some of these events are in English, like this one. Some have been held in Bulgarian, for especially addressing the Bulgarian teachers of the PLEIADE partnership and beyond. Some events have been held and will be held in Italian and others in Greek. In particular, we still have 3 satellite events that are going to take place in next 20 days or so. Today's event is entitled Listening to Student Voices on Cultural Diversity, a strategy to promote interculturalism in schools. On the 24th of February, there will be an event entitled Games and Gamification for Inclusion. And on the 1st of March, there will be an event in Italian entitled The Role of Technology for Inclusive and Participative Schools. So, as you can see, topics of these satellite events have to do with the main topics of the PLEIADE teachers. That is a project aiming to improve the ability of our schools to be inclusive and foster participation of all students in the life of the school community. PLEIADE is an Erasmus Plus project, in particular a strategic partnership for schools, and it does have schools as partners as well. Its priorities are, as I said, social inclusion. In particular, we intend to address the growing cultural and socioeconomic diversity of students in our European schools, strengthening the profile of the teaching profession, in particular developing learning design skills in teachers. The idea is to design educational interventions in such a way that they are as inclusive as possible, and as a consequence also tackling early school leaving and disadvantage. So the teacher's capacity to design and implement as well inclusive learning activities is the focus of the project, and it is for this reason that the project encompasses long-term training initiative for the PLEIADE teachers called BTAs, blended training activities, and also a second phase where the teachers will try to put into practice, still under the guidance of the PLEIADE researchers, what they have learned and what they have collaboratively learned during the training. PLEIADE relies very much on the ability of teachers to share their practices and experiences among each others. Yes, there are experts invited like Christina today that will talk about inclusion. There are some academic institutions and research institutions involved in PLEIADE, but we do believe that the schools involved in PLEIADE already have quite a lot of experience in this area, and therefore their professional development can be fostered, can revolve around the possibility of sharing practices among themselves. And in fact, the partners organization involved in PLEIADE include CNR ITD, which is the National Research Council of Italy, the Institute for Educational Technology, which is based in Genoa and is the coordinating partner, but also Sofia University in Bulgaria, a software house called Open Lab in Florence, Italy, the European Distance and Learning Network, which is in charge especially of the dissemination of the project, of the achievement and the outputs of the project, and 4 schools, one in Sofia, Bulgaria, one in Trani, Italy, one in Athens, and one in Limassol, Cyprus. These are all primary and lower secondary schools. They are pretty different from one another and are facing inclusion problems of a very different nature. But nevertheless, they have already started during the blended training activities to share with each other their approaches to inclusion. We also have an associated partner, which is ATEE, the Association for Teacher Education in Europe, based in Brussels, Belgium. And for those of you who are interested to know more about the project or download the outcome, the project outcome that have already been released, I address you to the PLEIADE project website. And so I will leave the floor to Christina for her presentation. Okay, I have unshared my screen, and please, Christina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I will now share my screen. Just a minute. Okay, I hope that you can see my presentation. I would like to thank you, Donatella, for this opportunity to be here. I would also like to thank Navsika for bringing us in touch. It is a very nice opportunity for me to be here with you to discuss on the topic of listening to student voices on cultural diversity. Over the last few years, we've been working on various Erasmus Plus projects on the ways to empower students to speak up about diversity, but also to enact towards interculturalism And for these reasons, I'm here with you today to discuss about the strategies to promote interculturalism in schools through empowering students to speak and be actively engaged in issues of cultural diversity and the promotion of cultural diversity and inclusion within the schools. Although a lot of our projects depend on the findings of our research, so our research is interdependent with the development of materials. Today, I will focus mainly on practices, as this is the focus of these satellite events. To begin with, I would like to provide you a bit of information on the context, why student voice important within the context of the European Union. Beyond the research and beyond the work of academics and educators on children's voices, European Union seems to pay increased attention over the last few years on launching dialogue with children. For example, the European Union Agency for the Fundamental Rights has initiated research that focuses on the ways to mainstream child participation in order to ensure that children's voices are heard and are taken into consideration in decision-making. At the same time, in April 2017, the Eurochild launched its child participation strategy, aiming to give voice to children and also young people, and also to build a community of child rights advocacy. This and the work of EU organizations and other satellite institutions also relate to the United Nations and UNESCO's work on children's voices and children's rights. For example, United Nations Child Rights Convention talks extensively about the fact that every child has the right to be heard. But still, many policies and many practices across the EU member states seem to be leaving children behind. And in this way, we often, even in schools as educators, we decide for children without children. When we talk about children's voices, we should view this term as a construct that includes the ways in which young people and children are given the opportunity, but also they are empowered to grasp the opportunity to meaningfully and actively engage in important decisions that have a considerable impact upon their lives. So when we're talking about children's voices, we're also talking about children taking the initiative to be heard, and not only about us as adults giving the opportunity to children to be heard in decision making. So as educators, as teachers, we have to also empower children to be able to grasp these opportunities. And here at this point, because we talk about children's voices on cultural diversity, I would like to mention that when we talk about cultural diversity, because often there is this misunderstanding in schools and in our practices within the classrooms, that diversity is about customs and tradition and cultural heritage of various countries. These are also important because are part of our European history and are part of our national histories and our local traditions. But it is very important to acknowledge also the dynamic nature of cultures. Cultures are not stable across time, across contexts, across geographical boundaries. So we always need to have and to take into consideration understandings of cultural diversity that are deeper and more rich, that reflect on principles of democracy, reflect on mutual understanding, reflect on the authentic interest in understanding other cultures, and also the way cultural diversity relates to social justice and to children's rights and human rights in general. So when we talk about children's voices on cultural diversity, we reflect on these deeper issues and the ways cultural diversity relates to social justice and issues of power, and not just cultural heritage and customs and traditions. And all the practices that I'm going to discuss later on relate to that. But why is it important to listen to student voices about cultural diversity? First of all, as teachers, we gain an insight to our students' needs, both learning ones, but also socio-emotional needs. And also students, they can better identify the factors that embed their inclusion in schools. And also they can provide us with suggestions about the ways to help improve our schools as inclusive organizations. Students in this way, they shouldn't be treated as receivers of any policies or practices that we implement in order to improve our schools or our classroom or our teaching and the way we facilitate learning. But children and young people should actively engage in the development and implementation of any initiatives. In this way, we should view students' voices on cultural diversity as the cornerstone for the improvement of the culturally diverse school. There is, of course, added value in the ways we empower students to be actively engaged in decision-making about the culturally diverse school. When students have their own agency, it is the only way we can talk about building inclusive school cultures. We cannot talk about building inclusive school cultures only if this is the initiative of the adults and the school stakeholders, but we don't take into consideration children and young people themselves. Also, we can sustain better classroom practices that take into consideration the differentiation of teaching and learning by responding to the diverse needs that our students have. But how can we listen to student voices? First of all, we can provide and build many opportunities within our classrooms to listen to children's emotions regarding diversity per se, regarding stereotypes, races, and also raise discussions within the classroom, but also beyond the classroom about marginalization, exclusion, and inclusion, not only in the negative connotation of various incidents of exclusion that may happen in school, but also to give the opportunity and to empower children to speak up about their own suggestions. Students should also always be working as equal to adults when we set the goals of our school, when we develop the policies of our school, when we design and lead activities in the school environment or within the classroom, even when we develop and conduct assessments, and in general, when we make decisions in education. At this point, we should acknowledge that because of the cultural diversity that is characterizing the student population, these suggestions and these remarks about the ways we should make decisions in education that come from children may be related to the ways children understand education because of their cultural backgrounds. And in this way, we should differentiate our practices and our policies accordingly. At the same point, we have to talk about culturally sustaining discussions. That means that when we discuss about cultural diversity within the classroom or at the school level, as I said before, we don't just focus on customs, traditions, music, or folk dancing, or traditional cuisines. This is just us talking about elements of our cultural heritage. This is just a folkloric diversity is. we discuss about culturally sustaining discussions, that means that we allow students to express their emotions appropriately, to regulate their emotions, to solve common problems, to build positive relationships with their peers and their adults in the environment, and also to engage and persist in challenging tasks. That means that we don't avoid difficult issues that might be daunting with the children, for example, stereotypes, racism, school bullying, but we provide our students with the opportunity to discuss these issues, and we bring them on the front. And also we give students the opportunity to engage in discussions where we reflect about the culture, our cultures in transition. That means our cultures are always evolving. They are not stable, as I said before, but they're constantly changing. They're changing because of our interaction. And that means that when we engage students in speaking up and in sharing their voices, that all this kind of initiatives should be based on collaboration and on discussion. And that's why most of the practices that I'm sharing on later on in this presentation, they are implemented in collaborative kind of environments. But as I said before, the point is, how do we engage children in activities and in practices that are creative, that are playful, and they allow even shy children to speak up. We also overcome any language barriers that might exist, because when we're talking about building inclusive schools, that means that we want to engage all students and provide all students with the opportunities to develop their agency within the classrooms. So it is very important, beyond of the power of discussions that we engage our students in our classrooms, to also use creative and innovative tools. Some of the tools that we have used in past projects or even in our research are related to collaborative art making. For example, 2 years ago, we completed a project that we wish to engage children in a methodology that focused on children inspiring children. So children themselves, they had to empower other children through creative activities to work towards interculturalism. One of the tools that we were using was collaborative art making. And we have used this kind of methodology in research also, but in other projects in order to combat marginalization and promote inclusion. So within this kind of activities, we engage children in collaboration within art groups that have a common goal to achieve. Within these art groups, children have the opportunity to share their thoughts. They can share their thoughts on stereotypes, on diversity, on democracy, and they can learn to share their thoughts. And also, students learn to share their emotions and use critical thought to go into the other's emotion. That means to develop skills in empathy and empathetic listening, but also in making decisions with others, and not only making decisions about ourselves. And also, what we found out was that through this kind of activities, eventually students started to develop friendships because they started to build trust within their art groups. At the same time, children who were facing learning or language difficulties or any other challenges, they were able to participate because the oral approach is very different from the oral approaches. As I said before, we wanted to overcome any barriers of language, but also we wanted to give the opportunity to children who were facing the risk of marginalization and exclusion, either academic or social exclusion, to be included within these groups. And because at the same time we're collecting data during these kind of projects, what we found out was that these students who were shy or who were facing learning or language challenges, they started to become more open because they could express themselves through art. And also because they were collaborating with these other students, they started to share their thoughts, they started to share their emotions. And as adults, we could provide them with a safe environment to do so. And was very important for us because just with interviews or just with classroom discussions or just that were informal, then occurred outside the classroom, we couldn't really break the barriers with these students. Start sharing and share some collaborative art making that we carried out. But what we find out also was that collaborative art making helped teachers, just a minute, sorry, to effectively transmit to students intercultural values like respect to the other and acceptance of diversity and differences, but also help students to see things differently because they had this opportunity to interact with each other, and especially students who are facing the risk of marginalization, they were given the opportunity to interact within these groups through art. This gave the opportunity to children to discuss about issues of even color, issues of difference, issues of bullying, and in the end of the day to reflect on power relations, either about gender, about ethnic differences, about economic differences, socioeconomic differences, and so on. Students came closer to each other and started to understand each other's emotions. They started to see their peers from a human perspective and think harder about their classmates, regardless of race, ethnicity, or social class. For example, here you can see an art creation that students produced in one of our projects. The children in their groups, they used various materials to collaboratively create a model of an area showing its culturally diverse character. First of all, the students, they had to select a specific area from their country. This project was implemented in 4 different European countries. They had to justify their selection with specific criteria, either about the history of that area, the presence of various cultural groups, or even the presence of monuments of cultural heritage that showed that this area was indeed highly diverse. And then they had to start making a project about the monuments and the cultural heritage side, about the people of this area, and they had to start reflecting on the cultural diversity, the presence of various religious groups. For example, here, this is a model of a town in Cyprus that is called Famagusta. I come from Cyprus. For you who maybe you are not aware, Cyprus faces a political situation since 1974. Is the only divided country within the European Union, and Famagusta remains in the occupied area. It is an area that at the moment, no one is residing there. The closed area of Famagusta is called Varosha. But before 1974, there you could see many monuments of that were representing various religious groups, Catholics, Christian Orthodox, Muslims, that Turkish Cypriots are mostly Muslims, and so on. So the students had to make a project about this area that they selected. They had to examine and study poems, literature, and to find the history behind that, but also to make interviews and build narratives about this area. But where did the student voice come out? Children, thereafter, they had to create drawings about how they could spend the day together there and how they could do things that are appealing to all despite of their cultural diversity. And there, when listening to students, what we could observe was that students, they started to share their reservations, or sometimes some students, they wanted to impose their own choices to other students, but they had to find ways to negotiate about that, and they had to make justifications about their preferences, and also they had to make suggestions. And in this way, the students started to speak up about their cultural diversity, because the students themselves were culturally diverse. They were representing various religious groups who had different preferences, and also different gender groups and different socioeconomic groups. And in this way, the students started to talk about all these issues. Thereafter, we moved the discussions and the art creations about their schools. So thereafter, the students had, as the project was going on, they had to discuss about cultural diversity within the school, to take photos from the school, and to find ways to show how we could combat marginalization and promote inclusion within the school. So we started from the cultural diversity, characterizing an area that the students selected to study, and then we moved on to the specificities of the school, and the students had to make suggestions, and also the students had to become researchers. And students in the research is also an important tool when we want to promote the active listening of student voices. Another important tool that we deploy as part of our research, but also as part of building various educational resources and activities, is the individual storytelling. Students become storytellers, and they engage in activities in order to reflect on lived experiences. And storytelling may draw upon their personal life narratives, or life narratives of other people and experiences. And according to these developed stories, students may create their own poems, drawings, songs, and so on. But what is very important here is that you might deploy and build storyboards, or you can use online materials and tools that you can find online for storytelling, where students select their own characters, and then they can build even pictures for the stories, but also they can make narrations of the stories and record the stories there. Also, you can use Web 2 tools for storytelling. But for us, what is more important as a tool beyond the personal storytelling kind of activity is collaborative storytelling and also poetry. During collaborative storytelling, students become tellers who bring in different ideas, and then they have to coordinate their ideas to create a coherent story, or to collaboratively create a poem. In this way, the stories or their poems, they can have a linear character or a non-linear character. For example, linear stories or poems, they might contain exactly one beginning, one middle, and one end. And the children, they have to collaborate to create this shared story in the form of relay. That means that no branches can be developed. The children have to develop a story with continuality, with coherence, with a single story path. They have to sequentially place the facts and the events and the incidents that happen in the story. There are various ways to share their voices, to share their experiences. For example, you can create a pool where students share their own point of view, and then the students can, the group of students can choose from this pool which beginning they want, which middle, and which end. This is one way. The other way is that each student may add on to the story within the group. Other ways is that students, they have to negotiate the plot of the story from the beginning to the middle to the end. They have to negotiate along all the points of the story creation. But also what is very interesting is the non-linear stories creation, because life is not actually linear, and the ways our societies are formatted are not, it's not, our societies do not have a linear character, do not have a singular kind of character. That's why we welcome non-linear stories as well. So, for example, children may share their views, they may share episodes of one story, but then they may decide to develop different branches to the stories. For example, for the story to have multiple endings, or to have different middle and then lead to different ending again. And this is very interesting because in this way, children, they can share their cultural understandings of the ways a story may take place. Few months ago, we published one article on the way collaborative storytelling may be used in order to develop students' perceptions of social justice, but also to allow students to share their own understanding of social justices. And we used folk tales that they were full of stereotypes, full of racist connotations. For example, I can share one of the folk tales that is Cypriot origin, and it's called Mavris. That means the black person. And in this story, there is this person who is called Mavris, and he wants to get married to the king's daughter, but he can't because of his color. And then he decides to travel to meet God so that he or she can share with him how he can change his color so that he can get married to the king's daughter and gain the king's approval. And it is very interesting because at the beginning, we didn't share the whole story with the kids. We used kamishibai. Kamishibai, it's the technique of Japanese theater that you can create small wooden or paper theaters within the classroom, and then you put in the kamishibai pictures, and then students develop the story. So while we're sharing this story, at the beginning, many students, they shared the view that Each one has the right to diversity, and we are all different, they said, and we have to accept the fact that we are all different. But some other students shared a different view on cultural diversity and said we are all the same, and they this pananthropic and this universal kind of understanding of cultural diversity. And there were just a few children, I'm talking about primary school children, who said that diversity can be a daunting task for people who the society makes them feel that they are different. And for social justice to occur, we have to all understand that sometimes it's not easy for you to face this kind of marginalization because society perceives you as different. But this was just the minority of students. So most of the students, they just share views, share voices on cultural diversity, either as difference or as respecting difference. So they perceived and they speak about cultural diversity in terms of respecting difference and providing the right to all to be different. And some others, they talk about building an understanding that social justice is enacted when we build an understanding of diversity as all of us being the same in our core. We are all human. They provided a humanistic approach. And then these just few, they share this view of diversity about all of us engaging in agency to combat marginalization, exclusion, and the violation of human rights, and so on. But as we're building the stories, and we use theatrical kind of conventions to allow the children to interfere in the development of the story plot, the children gradually, along with other kind of activities that we were implementing, because it wasn't something that was implemented just within a single day, they started to build different kind of understandings. For example, we had the corridor of thought, where the students had to position themselves whether the protagonist, the story hero, should follow his heart and go and change color, or follow his mind and not change color, because he perceived his right to remain the same as very important. And then the students had to position themselves in this corridor of thought, and they had to justify their views. And then they have to engage in group discussions about that and develop their own story plots. In the end, when we were collecting the data about how students experienced this kind of activities. For example, one student said that before she couldn't understand that color was so important in the sense of creating exclusion, because she perceived as color not being important in defining someone's future. But then she could listen to other stories that other children were sharing about negative experiences that some children had because of the stereotypes of color. So she said that she felt that she was she was in a battle with herself and how to change her own understanding. So she had to be confronted with different kind of narratives. And through these different kind of narratives, because children within the groups, they felt more safe to share these conflicting even kind of narratives, then they engage at the same time in a process of altering their views. Whilst before that, just with the group discussions in the whole classroom with the teacher, the students didn't feel that they were so safe to share this kind of experiences. And what students shared is that from by listening to other students' counter stories to their own stories, it is with this way that they started to develop empathetic understandings. But let me move on. As I said before, in our projects, we also use theatrical play. We allow students to improvise, to theatrically narrate their feelings of powerlessness, fear, tension, excitement, freedom, strength, weakness, and exclusion. They can show different kind of expressions about these concepts, either as persons or within the groups. They may choose music to represent these constructs that are related to feelings, but they can also create stories, as I said before, within their groups, and then dramatize these stories, dramatize their poems about cultural diversity, about exclusion, about fighting stereotypes and marginalization. Students may use postures, gestures, and movement to give shape with their bodies to expressions of power, oppression, and resistance. For example, here you may see how students silent statues. For example, we have used collaborative embodiment. That means that students use their bodies and they try to represent either cultural values or specific constructs. As I said before, marginalization, exclusion, powerlessness, power relations, and so on. And then they collaboratively create stories about these silent statues, or they develop theatrical plays regarding these constructs. Another kind of tool that we use is reportage. So the students may collaboratively produce radio or TV reportage to cover real news. For example, we might find some articles in newspapers or online, or some videos on YouTube or from the TV broadcasting and so on, that concern either the violation of human rights, stereotypes, races, the refugee crisis in Europe. And students, they can examine this kind of news, they can find more information, they can study either online, or they can engage in interviewing in their own research about this kind of news, and they can develop or a film or a video or record their own reportage, and they can show and project it to their classmates or upload it on YouTube. And in this way, students share their own views, and especially in schools that have radio stations that students may broadcast their own views and points. This is a good opportunity for something like that. Another tool that we are using is intercultural online pedagogy. We want to provide also the students the opportunity for intercultural exchange, not only within their classroom or within the school or within the area, even though all of these areas now are characterized by cultural diversity, but we want to use tools and platforms. For example, eTwinning is a very nice platform for schools to be sharing, and we want to engage students in these exchanges with students from other countries. Intercultural online pedagogy aims to engage students in interaction and collaborative project work with partners from other cultures through the tools of online communication, such as email, video conferencing, and discussion forums. So as part of our projects, we engage students in collaborative projects with students from other countries. The students created groups, and they use these online tools in order to carry out projects or develop stories, as I said before, about the collaborative storytelling, or engage in different kind of activities online. And in this way, the students could also share their voices with students from other countries, and that meant beyond the geographical boundaries of their own area or their own country. So we use teleteams, e-forums, including chat rooms and emailing. The students may produce projects on intercultural topics such as diversity, social justice, racism, poverty, or how these issues are interconnected even to cultural heritage and the preservation of cultural heritage sites. They can make telepresentations through video conferencing. They can use photographs that they have taken. Photo voice is a very nice tool to work with. For example, students take photos from their area, from their school, and they find ways and they make suggestions for improvement according to what they found from taking all these photos. They can share videos, audio narrations, and we can even use other means of technology. So this is pretty much it from the practices that I wanted to share with you today. And if we want to conclude with some points, by listening to student voices, children, they learn to consider and analyze both their personal experiences and various social situations. They gain new knowledge on important issues that affect their lives. They cultivate their critical thinking, they develop decision-making skills, and in the end of the day, they develop into socially active citizens. They also develop skills beyond empathy, such as accountability, self-confidence, self-awareness, and responsibility. They become responsible to take the initiative to promote inclusion within the schools. And children are significantly empowered in terms of their emotional education. Actually, now we are working on how we can empower students to become informal school leaders. We talk over the last few years about distributed leadership and about the ways teachers may take the initiative to become leaders in the schools. It is also important for children to take the initiative to become informal leaders in the schools, and informal leaders of their communities. So student voice is one of the most important methodologies that we should endorse as educators, as academics in education, and as researchers. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm open to any kind of questions or comments that you want to share. Donatella?
Thank you for your presentation, Christina. And I really would like to hear if there are comments, questions for Christina from the floor. Yes, there is one hand.
Yes, hello, it's me.
Hello, Nafsika.
Thank you very much, Christina. That was really interesting. I couldn't help thinking that, of course, you open up these art collaborations with the students, and you give them a lot of voice in those art collaborative projects. I was wondering if you try to control or steer the direction of that, of where that is going to some extent. The example of the king that couldn't get married because of the wrong color. How would you deal with it as researchers and the teachers you work with, if that went the completely wrong direction? I mean, if the children were going to, well, yes, this is how things are and this is how they should be. I mean, to what extent and how do you try to navigate that?
Yes, this is a very good question, actually, because a few years ago, I remember when I was doing my research for my postdoc, and I was videoing this classroom discussion, and the students were discussing about color, and they were sharing different views with the teacher. And then in the group that I was standing there, and I was just a step behind, the students were sharing completely different kind of views on color. And always I had that in mind. How are we not just bringing into the surface only what is socially desirable, and we don't lead students somewhere else just because we said so as teachers or as researchers? For this way, in this project that I mentioned before, Eurochange, we had this children inspiring children approach. So at the beginning, we tried to allow children. We had schools participating in the project, so we wanted to allow children to develop suggestions about how they wanted to engage in the activities and what kind of activities they would like to engage with. And also, we use all these creative kind of tools as art. And in this way, usually orally, the students might say something else, but when they have to negotiate with other students about making a decision, there is where they clash. And usually there is where these kind of different kind of viewpoints were coming to the surface. And that's why we're using collaboration a lot. But also, I will completely agree with you, Nafsika, because in one of our latest articles, we're talking about voices in transition. So students, always we talk about student voices as being self-proven or as being fully reflective of what students think or of what students are. But as teachers, as researchers, as academics, we should always view voices as being in transition. Sometimes students, even us adults, humans, we are not fully aware sometimes of what we truly believe, or we might be confused, or we might be in a point of transition that our voices are changing. And I was very fond of some researchers that were talking about post-methodological kind of approaches. So that means that it's not just important about which tools we use, but it's very important about allowing the multiplicity of voices to stand out, even from a single human who is participating in our research. It is complex, but still we have to allow voices to come out. Thank you, Nafsika.
Are there any other questions for Christina? I must say I was very pleased to see that many of the keywords and the concepts that Christina mentioned in her talk have been important keywords and concepts during the blended training activities of PLEIADE. Certainly collaboration is one of such keywords, and we are also trying to foster collaboration between teachers, not only between students, between teachers in designing their teaching, and between students in putting in practice inclusive education. And the other important concept in our training for the PLEIADE teachers is self-regulated learning, and the importance of letting students choose the way they want to express themselves, the type of artifacts they want to produce. So this is something in common with the idea of favoring students and lending their voice to express themselves. And also another important aspect is the aspect of emotions, which is part of the self-regulated learning concept. Often people think of self-regulated learning focusing mostly on the cognitive aspects, but actually most models of self-regulation put a lot of focus also on the emotional part and the ability to take the reins of one's own learning process also in terms of emotion. Don't get discouraged, try to overcome problems, try to negotiate solutions with peers, etc. So many of these aspects have been dealt with in the PLEIADE teacher training. And one question that I would like to ask Christina, because it is a big question we are facing in PLEIADE too, is: are there ways to assess the extent to which a teacher succeeded in promoting inclusion in his or her own classroom? Which ways, which approaches did you use?
So we were using a lot of implementation reports in the projects. It's something different in terms of research, but in these projects we were using a lot of implementation reports. That meant that all the developed activities and resources and methodologies were implemented through workshops in the participant schools. And then we had questionnaires, focus groups, and so on with the participant teachers and the participant students. But also the students were using other kind of means to express themselves, for example, through videos. They were creating a lot of videos about their points of view. And in this way, we wanted to see that. Also, we had some other projects that were focusing on friendship development. So it was mostly research-wise. We're using interviews and focus groups and also observations to see how things are progressing by engaging students in this kind of activities and by using this kind of tools. But mostly in the project is through workshops and having all these implementation reports, and also using research materials to research tools, and methods to evaluate the results. But inclusion is a never-ending process.
Yeah.
Never stops and always can expand.
Any other questions for Christina from the floor?
Nafsika,
Yeah. Sorry, can I ask a second one? I don't want to.
Yes, of course.
All of these activities that you presented and all of these practices must have involved a lot of teachers. So I wanted to ask you, do you have long-standing collaboration teachers or schools that you do research with? Because this is not just one session. It's
Yes, we have a network of schools that participate with us, mostly in the Erasmus Plus projects, but then we collaborate with them. Especially with the schools that are in Cyprus, we act as critical friends to these schools. So we engage in presentations. We go as academics and researchers within the school. We do workshops with teachers, and we activate this network according to the project. Because, for example, if we have a project that is about secondary education, then we activate different kinds of schools. And we have a network with primary education. And we collaborate also because sometimes teachers in Cyprus, they change schools because they are appointed by the government. So they are centrally appointed, they can become allocated elsewhere. So we collaborate with specific teachers also. We act as their critical friends. And we have this long-standing collaboration. But also we collaborate with schools in Spain. We have a school that we collaborate in Malta, in Austria, in Greece. We collaborate with school more than 10 years now. So yes, indeed, we have long-standing collaborations with some of the schools.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nafsika.
Last comment of yours leads me to another important question we are facing in PLEIADE, given that the 4 schools belong to 4 different countries for a total of 3 different languages. How do you deal with the differences in languages? Well, the teachers, many teachers speak English well enough, even if not all of the teachers, but many teachers do and are able to interact in English. What about the students?
Yes, we translate all the activities and all the resources in all the languages of the consortium. So that means that the students can engage in the activities in their own languages. But then, of course, in terms of the intercultural online pedagogy that I mentioned before, it means that English language is mostly used as the language of communication. But then again, because we have, for example, we have schools from Greece and Cyprus. That means that they can collaborate. And students, for example, in Cyprus, most of them, they are taught in English. And sometimes when we face these language issues, students mostly collaborate through the creative means, mostly through art or music. So, for example, we had schools that they interacted through e-twinning, and they interacted through music and art and this kind of activities, where the language becomes a barrier to oral communication. But we try to translate all the materials in all the languages of the consortium that we have.
Okay. It's a shame that no one from, apart from Nafsika, no one is asking questions.
You have my email, so if you want to ask something or comment or share your experiences, I would be more than happy to engage in a discussion with you personally.
Okay, Christina, so thank you so much for this interesting talk, and thank you. If you can send us the slides, I will make them available on the PLEIADE platform where the teachers can find them. And of course, the recordings of the event will also be made available a few days after this event.